what had happened, we were fishing with Nick Stanzik doing the show. We run up to a spot. We drop down and we hook up with a sword immediately and fight this. And we get this fish near the boat, probably fought him for about an hour. Beautiful fish. I'm looking at their 250, 300. So what a remarkable fish for the show. And the hook pulls. We go back on that spot. No sooner did they hit bottom again, we hook up again, fight another fish for an hour, maybe a little bit over, get the fish a little bit farther out, but we could see it. Another beautiful fish. We pull the hook. I said, man, we're just snake bitten. It's just bad. We go and we do it a third time. We hook up. Now I'm fighting this fish for 2 hours. Okay, now keep in mind, this is like almost constant fighting. And we're finally getting the fish somewhat close to where we think we're going to beat it. And I'm standing by my outboards, facing out. And my buddy, Carl, was running his boat as our camera crew on. I see Carl coming around the outboards with the fish angle in that direction. I go, Carl, what are you doing? He said, the camera crew, they don't want to see your butts. They said, we got to get in front of you. I said, Carl, we've had bad luck. We pulled the hooks on 2 swords. That angle, you're going to cut the fish off. I said, back up, go around the bow of my boat, come in that way. The sun will be at your back, and the fish is nowhere near there. You can get all the footage you need. I said, we're already having bad luck. So he backs out, and he goes idling around. And the last thing that I remember seeing at a corner of my eye was his boat coming around the bow of my boat as he was going to try to get position. I go to crank down. I feel his wake, and it wasn't a bad wake, lap the side of my boat. But it just so happened as I was going down to take a crank, the wake lapped on my boat, bounced it, my feet went up, and next thing you know, I catapulted in the water with this swordfish, and I'm going down. And I remember, since I always had an escape route. I'm a small boat guy, I big game fish, and I knew that sooner or later, when you're standing up here, there's going to be a chance you're going to go overboard. So how do you survive it? And I had these 3 things in my mind play out. The first thing is when you hit the water, slowly back to drag off on the reel to alleviate the pressure. Because some people will freak and not do anything. That sword will pull you down, or they freak and they go into free spool and create a big bird's nest, which locks it up and you still go down. That was number 1. I did that. And when I did that, the pressure came off and it came back to the top. The second part of the escape route was to grab the rod, pull to my chest, and unclip and swim out of the harness. That's where something went wrong. I'm doing it. I can't feel the rod, but I know I'm stuck to it. I know I free spooled it a good bit. And I said, I got to figure out what's going on. So I grabbed the side of my boat. And Nick Stanzik's grabbing me by my shirt, and I'm slapping his hand off me, because if I go down, Nick Stanzik is 80 pounds soaking wet. If I go down, I'm going to take him with me, and I'm not going to drown the kid. So I was thinking to myself, I got one shot here. I have to take a breath, find out what's going on with this rod, and I got to get out of it. Fortunately, Kevin saw what was happening. He jumps off the camera boat, swims over to me. When I had flipped over, the rod somehow twisted around with the rod itself going between my legs, and I'm out there trying to grab it. I can't get to it. Kevin gets in there, gets a hand, unclips me. We put the rod back into the boat, and I get back in the boat to fight the fish. But the third part of the escape plan wouldn't have worked, was to grab your pliers and cut the line, but the pliers were underneath the big stand-up harness that I have. And I'll circle back here in a second, but I got back up in the boat. And I said, Nick, push that drag down. Is this fish still here? And the fish was still there. So I get back up, get in the harness again, beat beyond comparison and fatigue, fought the fish another half hour, and we're getting alongside the boat. Nick says, you want me to fly gaff it or you want me to dart it? I said, kill this thing the fastest way you know how, because I don't know how much I've got left of me. And he did. And we brought in, it was a 256-pound swordfish. I'm George Poveromo, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Got a great guest for us again today. George Poveromo is a legend in the television business. He's taught millions of people how to fish through his seminars, his national fishing seminars that he's done. Started out with Mark Sosson doing those, and now he has them all by himself. He has the George Poveromo's World of Saltwater Fishing, which has been on ESPN, NBC Sports, and now on the Discovery Channel. George is a wealth of knowledge, and he certainly does have a lot of stories. And I really enjoyed hearing some that I had never heard before. Never heard a lot of these stories. And if you're a fan of George Poveromo, chances are you may never have heard these stories either. So stand by for a great conversation, a really entertaining hour and a half with the legend, George Poveromo. This episode is brought to you by Fishing Points. There are a lot of great features of the Fishing Points app. You can go to your app store and you can get it and you can check it out. One of the best things that I like about that app is that it has really high quality nautical charts. We fish off the grid often, and sometimes you don't have any reception, so a lot of your stuff on your phone doesn't work. But you can download these maps right to your phone so you can study them when you're off the grid, or you can actually use them and still get depth data while you are not connected to the internet. That's really cool. There's tons of things about fishing apps or Fishing Points that I think that you're really going to like. You can go right now to tomrowlandpodcast.com/points, and you can get 30% off a yearly subscription, and you can also start your free trial right away. So go check that out. I think you're really going to like it. Barracuda Tackle is a place where we get our cast nets. They make awesome cast nets. They have tons you can choose from there. Go to barracudatackle.com, and they have tons of other stuff besides cast nets as well. It's a great resource. Go to boathammockstands.com and get a stand that goes right in your rod holder. It allows you to hang a hammock from your boat, or in your boat, I should say. You'll have the most comfortable boat on the sandbar, or if you go on overnight trips, it's fantastic for that as well. And we have Empire Boat Covers. Empire Boat Covers is a very good place to get an affordable boat cover. You go to empirecovers.com/TRP, and you can keep all those leaves from falling in your boat. It's fall. It's about to happen. You need to cover up all your stuff. A boat cover is a fantastic way to take care of your boats, but they have all kinds of covers. Boat covers for your car, for your RV, for your grill. They have covers for everything that you can imagine. And if you go to empirecovers.com/TRP, you can get 15% off your order and free shipping. So don't forget to use that code TRP to take advantage of that. And now we're getting back to the show. All right, George Poveromo, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing fine this morning. Hope all's going well with you.
Yeah, after we worked out all of our technical issues, you got two guys here with AOL addresses, so you know that the technology is probably going to be an issue. But after writing notes to one another across Zoom, we figured it out. We got it going.
No doubt. Just like if the GPS goes down on the boat, all you do is you go to the regular compass like we were used to doing before all the electronics came into play.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. That's the way to do it anyway. So speaking of that, I mean, George, you're a legend in this world, and you've really had a great career. You've been on TV for 20 years. Before that, I mean, I don't really know your story before your television show, so I'm really interested in learning about what you did. But I did some research on online, and there were all kinds of stories about you fishing with your family when you were really young, especially in the Marquesas Keys, which I find very, very interesting.
Sure.
That's some of my home water. But fill me in a little bit. How did your obsession with fishing get started? It was with your dad, right, and your family?
Absolutely. It all started with my father. He's the one who gets the blame for this crazy addiction that I have. And my dad was a dentist in Bay Harbor Islands, which is, Miami Beach area. And he had a crazy passion for fishing. He would just love to fish. And going back as far as I can remember, about 6 years of age, on his way back from work, he would pick me up and he would take me to the seawall in North Biscayne Bay, by the Broad Causeway Bridge. And they had a seawall and they had a little pier. And I'd had this little plastic kid's outfit with a little tiny hook. He'd bring these little pieces of shrimp. And I would catch these little grunts and snappers that had been all maybe 3 inches long. And I remember to this day that little fish telegraphing through that little rod and the excitement when I would catch this little thing. Of course, we let him go. And that's when it really hit me. And at that point in time, looking back, that's when I think this whole thing is a lot is genetics, because from that point on, I was hooked. So when my dad would fish, he had a 23-foot boat. And when I started getting old enough to go with him, we would go in Biscayne Bay and play around for trout. He was had reservations about taking me out offshore. But then his favorite spot to fish, which he had done this religiously for decades, was trailer the boat to Key West, run out to the Marquesas, and hit the rock piles in the Gulf for groupers and snappers. And as soon as I was old enough to basically survive those trips, he would take me. Yeah. And pretty much it was him who put that bug in me. And then growing up, I never really did any other sports. There was no other sport that interested me. I couldn't wait to get back from school because there's this freshwater canal that was 2 streets over that I would walk that bank until dinner time chasing largemouth bass. But all my spare time was pretty much spent on fishing. I did some go-kart racing back in the day, but the fishing was the whole big deal. And when my dad finally got tired of it, I was 16 at the time, had my driver's license, was able to trailer the family boat. And then pretty much when I got the driver's license and family boat, it just spiraled out of control from there.
Yeah. So tell me about the Marquesas. Like you said you were going out there when you were 6 years old. Is that right?
Yeah. The Marquesas, he probably started bringing me there when I was around 8 years old. We fished a lot of local because I was too young. And back then, it wasn't like it is today where we have these fast boats and fuel capacities where, back then you'd run 28 miles west of Key West. That was a long trip. And so in a lot of cases, what he would do would leave early in the morning, run out there. We hit the rock piles all day. Then he would anchor up at night, cook some of the fish that we caught, and then go night fishing. Come back in, anchor up, and the next morning and pretty much most of the day we would fish and then drive back with the boat to Key West. It wasn't feasible based on the low speeds and limited fuel to be able to run back and forth each day like we have been doing for a long time now. But his whole thing is mutton snapper and grouper, primarily mutton snapper. That was his favorite fish, and he would hit those rock piles. And to him, there's only 2 fish in the world that existed, mutton snapper and grouper. And then me, having done so much bottom fishing, I'm more of an offshore person. And I remember later on, we'd have arguments when I would talk him into going offshore fishing. I don't want to go out there and troll. It's boring. Let's drop a grouper and snapper. We'd have these friendly arguments. And most of the time I would win. But, if something didn't eat offshore in about an hour, then I started hearing, come on, let's get back on the reef, drop down, maybe try to get a mutton or grouper. So it was a big conflict between offshore and bottom fishing, but the Marquesas, by far his favorite spot. And I can tell you, I had been there so many times since I was a young kid with him through my early 20s that it got to the point when I would hear him talk, hey, I'm thinking about one of the Marquesas this week. And I would shudder when I hear the Marquesas. Oh, here we go again.
That's an interesting place for somebody, you're like in the Miami area. That's a long way to go. And back then there would have been so much other great fishing right there in Miami. Why was or how did he even find out about that? It seems like a really long way to go.
It is. And it was a fact, a gentleman by the name of Bob Colvin. My dad was a dentist, as I mentioned, and Bob Colvin sold dental supplies. And early on in my dad's career, they become close friends. And Bob Colvin was the one that really supercharged him when it started to come to fishing. And then Bob Colvin was the one that said, hey, you ever fish the Marquesas? And my dad said, oh, what are they? And he says, come on, we got to take our boats. Let's go down there, because Bob had lived in Homestead, and that was his favorite area. So Bob Colvin was the one who introduced my dad to the Marquesas. And then my dad fell in love with the place because it was a spot that you could drop down with light tackle or anything, and you're always getting strikes. There's a lot of undersized fish there, as you well know, but there's some beauties to be had as well. And it was him who got my dad interested in there, and then that was my dad's favorite place. And I remember in 1979, we bought our first, we upgraded from a 23 maker to a 25. And I wanted to go to Bimini. I said, let's go to Bimini. And so we had run over to Bimini. My dad got tired of that like real fast. Come on, let's put this boat on a trailer and head to the Marquesas after this Bimini trip. So it's, but he fell in love with the place, and I still love it. And because it's such a family history there, that I try to at least get down there once a year to fish, because it's a special place, and the memories are just so rich. Every time you go by that area, your mind just goes back to all those wonderful times that you had. It's just a very special place.
Isn't that something, like the way that a place will do that to you? And it doesn't, I mean, I could go back to, a little pond I fished with my dad in Tennessee, and the same thing would happen, but I could go to another one and I wouldn't get those memories. It's like geographical place kind of does that to you sometimes.
It does, and it just gets you hooked. And but it is a special place, and I think my father was the first unofficial mayor of the Marquesas out there.
Do you remember stilt houses being out there? I've heard that there were stilt houses there, and people have told me, they've even shown me like where the base was, kind of like the Ernest Hemingway house off Cottrell. I heard there were other places out there in the Marquesas. Do you remember anything like that?
I do not. I don't remember anything, related to stilt houses. That I don't.
Yeah.
But I could tell you some of the things that I do remember. Like I mentioned, we would anchor overnight, and then in the morning, you wake up and you fry some eggs on a Bunsen burner or whatever we had back then. And a couple of times, I guess this had to been May. You know this better than anybody. I woke up like super early. I heard all this water splash noise. I look out there, there could be thousands of tarpon just migrating past us where we were anchored. I'm throwing everything in the world, can't even get them to look at it. It was like unreal. Would that have been May?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you were probably right on the northeast corner, and they were just pouring by. But you could have been really anchored up anywhere. I mean, the tarpon. There's every spot out there is a pretty good spot, on some tide. And but that area, would you see anyone else out there? Any other boats, commercial boats, anything?
The commercial boats you would see. Naturally, when in lobster season, you'd see the lobster boats out there. But every great once in a while, you'd see a commercial fishing boat. I don't know where they're going for yellowtails or what. They would come in there and anchor for the night. But pretty much back in that time frame, it was a remote place. I mean, if you saw another recreational boat out there, that was like really an odd sighting, because it was that back then was, the wild, wild west, and pretty much uncharted frontier going that far back in time.
I mean, I would think for sure it was the wild, wild west. I mean, even in the 70s, it was the wild, wild west.
Right.
The 80s. I mean, because what you're talking about, like the boats, we did not have the boats that we do today. We did not have the engines, the fuel economy. Like that was a long way to go. And then you hear like Ralph Delph talking about, the stories that I used to hear about him finding the wrecks out there and just finding them by the cobia. You would just run, and then you would just see cobias floating, and he'd be like, okay, this seems like a pretty good spot.
It's amazing how they did that well before, Loran and especially, GPS, but Loran, how they would just run that stopwatch. And that Bob Calden gentleman I told you about, who was a buddy of my father's, was from that old school era where he would do the timing deal to get out to a lot of those spots off the Keys.
Yeah, well, a lot of the young listeners will not understand what you're talking about. Explain that so that people understand exactly how that works and how it worked only with your boat. Like you had to do it with your RPMs on your boat.
You did. And I remember what we had to do before we had gone down to the Keys with Bob Colvin. He said, go to Government Cut, Miami. They have that measured mile that you could run. Figure out what RPMs and what speed you're running. So what it was based on your particular boat at a certain RPM at a certain speed. And you would have a certain time frame on a certain heading that would tell you, here's where this wreck lies. So it was a combination of the speed and running that time on a certain heading. And in a lot of the situations when you would get near a wreck, back then you had nowhere near the pressure that we see today. You would see life come up. You'd see cudas near the top. You'd see turtles pop up. So even if you were a few hundred, 400, 500, 600 feet off, you could tell where the wreck was just by the amount of life that was concentrating in that one area. So then you would circle over, and you had the old paper graph machine, and you start marking, and here we are. It was, speed over ground versus time. But then again, you had the advantage of unpressured waters, to where a lot of this life also gave itself up and told you there's a good piece of structure under you there too.
Right. That's just, and then you start factoring in, like, what if it's blowing 20 instead of being slick calm? Yeah. And then, I mean, I'm sure there were so many days where you would just like just not find anything. It's like, well, we can't run the same speed that we ran that government cut because of the wind or the waves or whatever. Or maybe we have too many people in the boat, or it's loaded down too much. And so like, we're not even close. So
you had to take in case of that, you would have to know what your different speeds were and then what to allot versus the extra time. If you were to run slower, how much more time you would have to take on the clock to try to get you in that area. And telling you, back then you had to have somebody who was really brilliant in math to figure a lot of that stuff out. And
right. And then don't bother them. And then don't bother them while they're driving, because I mean, if you took your mind off of what you were doing, then it's all lost. Because if you took, I mean, how long have we been 5 degrees off of our heading? Like, if you're talking like you would do today, that you would end up in the middle of nowhere.
I know. So when you were in that zone, whoever it was that was actually running the boat at that time was like the most unsociable person until he actually got out to the area right. and found it. Then he could unwind and relax. And then from that point, going back was a little bit better, because at one point you're going to hit land somewhere. So, but it was more critical to get to that spot and those wrecks than anything else. And also going, way back to when I can remember, I'm going back now, maybe 8, 9 years old. Like a lot of times how they would find those better rock piles in the Gulf is they would just drift over areas, and they'd have like a lead stick or a sinker, and it would drop it down and lift it and drag. And you could tell if you're coming over hard bottom by the dents in that sinker. Huh. So if you're dropping it down and you're hitting sand, you're not going to get those dents. But you go down and you start hitting the harder bottom. Number one, you're going to feel the difference between sand and the rocks. And then you reel up and you could see the dents. Okay, here's a rock pile. Let's throw the anchor on this and start fishing. So this is going, like I said, I was like 8 years old back then. And this is before the equipment that we have today. Now you put in, these charts and you can just see every single thing in the world and just go for it, Yeah.
What do you think was the first major technological advance that made it easier for you and your dad to like find these places? And like the first thing, going from that paper chart, I mean, that paper, I remember my grandfather having one of those Lowrance paper charts, and man, I mean, it was real paper. Like if water got on it, it was messed up. Nothing was waterproof back then. Like there were major issues with that. But I wonder if you can think about like the first thing that made it so much easier.
It would have to be like a combination. It was when Lowrance came to the recreational anglers, is when your nav aids. It would be that, and also the quality fish finders, to where you could be drifting or running over an area and actually see a good representation of what's on that bottom. I would say those two were really the breakthroughs, and everything else followed in place as far as the reliability of the outboards and the power, as per that particular time frame. Then boat companies started to put some more fuel in the boats, and so it's a combination. But if you had to go early on, I would have to say it was definitely Lowrance and then the fish finders that opened up a lot of that, because then the guesswork was pretty much taken out of that. You could look at charts and figure out where you wanted to go based on the coordinates and that. So that's what I would have to say.
And then when you found something, you had a reasonable chance of finding it again, with a number. Now you had this Lowrance number. That seems like that would be a big deal, instead of kind of like, okay, like if you went to a wreck or you tried to go to a wreck and maybe you missed it, but then you found another one, which you could easily do in the quicksands area of the Marquesas or it's another area. So now you're like, okay, this has been great fishing. So now we got to make our way back to Boca Grande or wherever that we're trying to go to. And how are we going to try to find this place again? Like now you kind of found it on accident. That would be tricky, like before Lowrance. But then once you had Lowrance, you could at least assign some sort of a number to it and get you real close to the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I tell you, I mean, and then just learning all of this stuff and probably navigating without certainly without any GPS, but also in the dark, because you had to leave so early because the boats were slow. And I mean, that's pretty tricky. I mean, I think I was fortunate enough to kind of learn how to navigate before the GPS, because, today it's a different deal. I mean, it's like playing a video game almost. You just follow along, and you can pretty much go anywhere. But back then, it was easy to make a mistake. Very easy.
Oh, I know. And you just look at all the advances we have today, and you just wonder how these fish even have a shot anymore. It's like, wow, there's a lot going against them. Thank goodness we have some decent conservation measures in place.
Right. That's something else you've been really involved with, the CCA. How long have you been involved with them?
A long time, going way back since I could remember. And one of them, I'll give you a little lesser known fact about me, which ties in with Daryl Lawrence, founder of Lawrence Electronics and all, is when I graduated college, in 1981, University of Miami, and I had gone to work with Saltwater Sportsman a couple years later. But from 81 to 1984, I was hired on to run the Greater Miami Billfish Tournament. They'd started a Miami Sailfish Tournament that would run as a Triple Crown event with the Fort Lauderdale Billfish Tournament and then the Pompano Beach Fishing Rodeo. Now, the problem back then, these were all kill tournaments. So in that month and a half time frame when all three would run, there'd be 300-400 sailfish killed amongst the three tournaments, which was horrendous. So I had come on board and ran it the first year and trying to convince the board we needed to turn this around to a release tournament. And you had all the old school captains are more selfish, we're not going to do it. And they fought me every step of the way. I was very close with Daryl Lawrence because Daryl had fished the Mako owner tournaments, the outdoor rider tournaments. And, he got involved in a lot of that. So I had known him and he took a very good liking to me and we became, very good friends. And he was the major sponsor of the Miami Billfish Tournament back then. And so finally, we want to make this a release, and the board shoots me down. So I called Daryl, said, Daryl, I know you're a sponsor and you committed, but I said, I have to ask you this. Would you back me and let's call their bluff at the tournament? And I told him, because Daryl's a big conservationist, I said, we need to make this a release tournament. They're killing these sales. It's bad. You're a major sponsor. I said, I need your help. I know you're committed, but I want you to back me up. I'm going to go to the next meeting and saying, Daryl Lawrence says they're going to pull their major sponsorship if we don't become a release tournament. And he says, you got my back in 100%. And so the next meeting came up and I said that and they screamed, you can't do that. And I just said, hey, people, look, let me know. Do we have a tournament or we don't? As you will know, he's the major sponsor. Without him, we're done. Let me know and I'll wrap up tonight and we'll go home. Or are we going to make this a go? And they begrudgingly said, well, we've got to do it. And so we became a release tournament, where the winners had to be polygraphed. And the next event that we did, by just ironically, was the lowest number of sailfish ever caught. People think they're going to go rampant and cheat and all that. And what had happened because of that, the pressure went on Fort Lauderdale and the Pompano Beach Rodeo. Fort Lauderdale had converted to a release deal, and then Pompano converted to a partial release deal. Or at one point, they ended up doing away with bringing these billfish in. So because of the little bluff that Daryl Lawrence backed me up on, we converted that whole scene in South Florida sailfish tournaments to all release. And subsequently, all these other events, events had to be all release. So that was a little lesser known fact. I was the director of the Greater Miami Billfish Tournament back then. And because of Daryl Lawrence tag teaming me, we changed the whole face of kill sailfish tournaments out of South Florida.
That's super cool. I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. I certainly didn't know the tie-in with Daryl Lawrence. He was probably very influential in the catch and release bass scene as well, right?
Yeah, a big conservationist all the way around. He always practiced conservation everywhere and then preached it. And what was funny about that, and in my saltwater sportsman years and the rider tournaments, this and that, when I decided to go out with a television series, I talked to him, said, Daryl, I said, just to let you know, I'm going to shoot a pilot. And I said, if it's picked up, I said, don't spend that advertising money because I'm going to call you up. And he goes, all right, George, you get on the national network. We'll be there. And sure enough, we got on our first year. ESPN 2 picked us up. I called Daryl. Hey, Daryl, guess what? I hope you didn't spend all that advertising money. I'm on. He goes, did you get there? Yeah. And he says, what do you need to do this? And I told him, he goes, I'll call my advertising people tomorrow. And he says, send a contract. And he signed off and he's been my television sponsor, even pretty much through now, because then Lowrance got acquired by Navico, which is a Simrad. And in between this, since I was more an offshore guy, they segued me to the Simrad brand. And so really that whole Daryl Lowrance relationship still lives to this day because of that whole deal. But I was that close to him where I told him, I said, don't spend that advertising money. If I get a show, I'm calling you. And true to form, he was right there.
That's super cool. So what was before I find out about how the television show started, what was the major complaint about going to away from the kill tournaments to the release tournaments? Did people think that you were going to cheat or people would cheat or
cheating? People could make things up, and they had to have it structured. And we had an incident, and not the first year, but the second year, where the attorneys who wrote the rules up, the stipulation, not only did you have to release the most sailfish to win, but you also had to pass the polygraph exam to the satisfaction of the board of directors. So there was really 2 hurdles you had to do. So first year, it was remarkable. The second year in the fall event, Lauderdale had an issue with a captain, and they warned us. And so we were always in April with our tournament. And they said, this captain's coming in the tournament and he cheated and this and that. And I said, well, why did you let him win? Well, we were afraid of getting sued, this and that. I said, well, that's a stupid thing. You're defeating the purpose. Anyway, the guy fudged it big time in the billfish tournament. So we pulled him off and his son off and the mate. And we had gone into a room with a polygraph examiner, and they examined each one of these individuals separately. And we would sit in there and watch it. And, I was never one I didn't know how accurate a polygraph exam was or wasn't. I ever took one in my life, but I watched the questions they asked. And every time that needle would spike up and then down and down. And then they finally laid, they did the captain twice, and then they did the captain's son, and they did the person who was part of the team. They laid all 4 of these exams alongside each other and said, here are the questions. And every single one spiked and so finally we called them in. The captain said, okay, here's the deal. You're not going to win this. You cheated. And it's obvious right here. We're going to disqualify you. We could let you out easy and say there's a technical mishap on one of your reporting deal. We'll let you slide out without the embarrassment. And he said, no way. And he said, we're going to sue you. This and that. That's fine. I said, we had attorneys on the board of directors. They said they would take up the cause. I said, you sign this deal. And he fought. And I remember Harry Vernon was sitting in there and he was threatening Harry Vernon. And it got ugly. This is the Biscayne Bay Marriott, but we stood our grounds and said, that's it. They said, we're going to, go ahead and disqualify you. So the Miami Herald was there and said, what happened? I said, we disqualified them because they failed the polygraph exam. Well, the person they were fishing with comes back in, a gentleman crying to me. I'm sorry, they made me do this. They made me do this. Please stop this bad publicity. I work for Florida Power and Light. I can't afford to lose my job over this. So we should have thought of that before you pulled this stunt. And anyway, it was in there, their names. This guy worked for Florida Power and Light. And it just so happened that the guy who was caught worked at the FPL lot or division that one of my close friends worked at. So he called me up. He says, my God, this is after the tournament. When this guy, he pulls his truck in the lot and they get on the big Florida Power trucks to go and they come back in. People were taking these stucco poles and taping fake outriggers on his mirrors and putting a fake box, liar. And he took a beating for that one. But we upheld it, and then we barred this individual on his boat for life, who was caught blatantly cheating. And then that was the big deal, was the cheating aspect. But we had safeguards. And one of my arguments, and to this day, is, well, if you have a kill tournament, let's just say you have dolphin, kingfish, wahoo, non-billfish, people bring them in. Who's to say, Tom, you and I, we got a connection here. You're 20 miles off Miami. I'm 25 miles off Fort Lauderdale. You get a 30-pound dolphin. I got 2, nice dolphin here. And say we got a third buddy who's got a big king. And we all have a point to meet up and for all these fish in one boat. Just because you pulled to the dock and offload these fish, people assume that you caught them. And that may not be true. And see, there's an easier way to cheat in events like that than actually having to go in front of a polygraph exam, my personal opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And today, like now you can do it with video and all this other stuff. And digital photography, which is instantaneous. But back then, like even if you gave them cameras, which was almost an impossibility because cameras were expensive and there weren't such things as digital. I mean, as disposable cameras probably right then. It would even take a long time to develop the film. So that makes that, useless as well. So that's interesting. So what was to gain? Why would someone go through all of those measures to cheat? How much money were we talking about?
I remember back then, I think our top prize was like 10 grand cash.
Well, that's
so
real
it was a
money.
pretty healthy paycheck. And, and that individual had cheated the Fort Lauderdale tournament. I don't know what they paid him up there. It could have been 5, 6, 7 grand, or I'm not sure. But, you win all the classes in a Miami Billfish tournament. It's got to be worth at least 10 grand, if not more than that.
Right. So it's a good thing that didn't bring the tournament down, like the idea of the release tournament, and because the other tournaments could at that point have said, well, it's not working. Look, somebody's cheated in 2 of these. We're going back to the kill, which you're saying that you kind of rallied against for the reasons that you just gave us. But was there any kind of a backlash on that? Did any of the tournaments?
No, that whole incident, the fact that the first time we did that, we had the lowest catch rate in Miami Billfish tournament history at that time. And the second time when we were challenged, we stood up to it and won and blew them out. So I think that strengthened the whole deal, and everything pretty much was falling into place, and people feeling more comfortable with that style of tournament going the release.
Well, that causes, everything causes ripple effects, but that doing something like that in a big game fishing tournament, like a sailfish tournament, that certainly has ripple effects that would go straight into tarpon tournaments and bonefish tournaments and the red bone and things like that. And the tarpon tournaments, they were kill tournaments for a long time. They people did not want that to go away either. But it did finally, and probably for a really good reason. I mean, it has to be that way.
And there was another twist that show you how many legs the sailfish kill tournament had. Now they justified it in a lot of cases. They would take the sailfish, have it smoked, and distribute it to needy people. But I never knew, and the board really never knew, just how much of that actually had gotten to needy people. Back then, there was a big black market for sailfish, and it was illegal. You couldn't sell it, but a huge black market existed where a lot of these big name captains would take these sails and after hours sell them for. I remember back then you were getting $2.50 a pound for the whole fish to smokehouses, and they would sell that as smoked fish and just distribute that. So, Miami Billfish tournament had one major collector of all that was in charge. And so, I'm not so sure how much of that actually went to needy people and how much of that went on the black market and lined somebody else's pocket,
It's like a Carl Hyacin novel. It seems like, there's this dirty underworld of something that seems so kind of on the surface, seems so, naive and kind of just you're just going out for a fishing tournament, but then you got people trying to cheat, and then there's a black market. That's a pretty interesting story.
Just remember, we're in South Florida.
Yeah, anything can happen in South Florida, that's for sure.
It usually does.
Yeah. So you kind of alluded to how the TV show started, and you had a good relationship with Daryl Lawrence. But were you already working at Saltwater Sportsman at this point? So that was kind of
absolutely.
your ramp up.
Yep, 1983. I came aboard with Saltwater Sportsman. I'm still there. I pen their tackle and tactics column, write several features a year. So I've been with them since 1983. And in 1983, we started. Actually, I came aboard 83, and in 1987, Mark Sosson and I had these discussions about coming out with a national seminar series tour, and how that came into being. Our Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, which enters in the year 34 this coming January. How that came into being was at the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show each October or early November. Saltwater Sportsman would call us, hey, George, hey, Mark, and a couple other riders. We want you to do these little clinics for the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show, because the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show talks Saltwater Sportsman, and hey, you do the clinics. So it was the most embarrassing thing in the world. We would go to the Lauderdale Boat Show, and it had a stage. It was by the food court. So you would walk up on stage. They announced that Mark Sosson was coming on at 7 at night. I was coming on at 5 in the afternoon. We would go up there and give a half-hour clinic, and you'd look out there, and it'd be half a dozen people just sitting there, not to hear you, but to eat the hot dog or the hamburger they just had the food concession. And this would happen to the point where Sosson and I would talk. So this is embarrassing in a saltwater sportsman name, let alone our names. So after a few years of that, we told Rip Cunningham, hey, Rip, we got to stop it. This is an embarrassment. The only people we're attracting are people who want to eat, need a seat. And after that, boom, they're gone. I said, the mentality is different at a boat show. People are there to eat a sandwich, drink a beer, walk around and look at boats. They're in a moving mode. It's not a seminar mode where you need people to sit down with their minds open, ready to learn. Two different animals here. So Mark and I came up with this idea about doing a national tour and taking it around the country, getting saltwater sportsmen to back this. So we put everything together. Daryl Lawrence was first to jump on that as well, and go figure. And we had a good lineup of sponsors. We still do. So in 1988, we hit the road with the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, and it was a hit right out of the box. We're packing auditoriums, an all-day seminar on a Saturday. And I had done that. We'll still do it. It's like I said, year 34 will be coming up in 2021. But about 20 years earlier from today, I'm thinking, now what's my next logical career move? I'm with Saltwater Sportsman. It's the #1 saltwater fishing publication out there. We have the seminar series. Mark Sosson did 10 years of that, and then he dropped out. And I took it from there. He and I were equal partners for the first 10 years of the tour. And then he retired from it, and I took it and have the whole thing as they do now. I said, my next logical career move would be to come out with a television show, but a national one. I didn't want to do something on a local level. And it was hard for me to even watch television shows back then because I thought it was insulting to the sport of fishing. Two guys in a boat. Hey there, Jerry. That's a beautiful fish. Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. Look, man, look how clean that fish is. Yeah, she's a beauty. Let it go. And they do it. And it's the same old thing. I said, this is almost like mind rot. I said, I came out with a show concept, that pattern of seminar series in a way, in that with my connection to Saltwater Sportsman, I had the opportunity to travel abroad a lot and write features. And I said, my show, I could easily travel to great international destinations, but for the average saltwater recreational angler, going to, say, Venezuela for a white marlin outing might be a dream trip once in a lifetime if he was able to even do that. So I said, let me go after the backbone of the saltwater recreational market. The anglers who fish saltwater in these 17-foot boats on up to 45, 47-foot boats, which is the backbone. And that's where I had come out with a show concept to focus on coastal U.S. Every now and then we'll do a show abroad, but coastal U.S. targeting that saltwater market from the inshore saltwater, nearshore to offshore, which would hit the majority of a recreational market. And where you make an entertaining show, but you're also fishing, you're talking technicalities, you're showing how you're doing it. So if you were doing a dolphin show, say at Island Rada, somebody from up in Virginia who dolphin fishes, well, they're not fishing our same waters, but look at the techniques that they're using here. I'm going to try to adapt that up in here. And of course, we moved the show being national. We shot our show everywhere from Maine, every coastal state, all around through Texas, and then Alaska as well. So that was a very big hit, that show concept that we were doing right there. So it worked out real nicely for us. So
did that debut on ESPN?
It did. We had sent 2 VHS tapes out because back then the networks wouldn't talk to you. They wanted to see if you were up to their standards. So back then it was ESPN and the national network, TNN. I sent 2 packages out simultaneously. I got a call a week later from ESPN saying, we have a time slot. Somebody dropped out of our new ESPN2 at the 7 a.m. Would you be interested in taking that over? I said, absolutely. So we flew to Connecticut and worked our deal. So we had gone with ESPN for the first 10 years of our television series, and ESPN waited to get everybody where their contract ended on the same time frame. And then they did away with their outdoors.
I know.
And what yeah. And I'll tell you why. And then right after that is 3 days later, we got picked up by Versus, which was NBC Sports. So we ran 9 years at NBC Sports till about a year and a half ago. They said the same thing. We're getting out of all the outdoors. So I called up, my team and said, all right, guys, looks like we're going to fish for fun coming up because, I said, we're done. And this was year 19. I said, I've got to get my 20-year anniversary series in. And through a connection, a very good connection, I had ESPN, who had connections over at Discovery. 2 weeks later, we ended up over at Discovery. And that's where we celebrated our 20-year anniversary on television. And that's what we're locked in to do 2021. So our ongoing joke is, we wore out ESPN2, the major network. We were out NBC Sports, so we'll go over there and wear them out too.
Yeah, well, that's a very similar path that we were on. We did our first season on the Outdoor Channel, and Rich and I were both still guiding at the time, and we were so proud of this show, but the Outdoor Channel was so small. And the first year we had just done this show, put our heart and soul into it, and every client that got on the boat, I would say, "Have you seen the show?" And they would say, "No, not yet. What's it on?" And I'd say, "The Outdoor Channel." And they'd say, "Oh, I get that." And that was when it used to be Outdoor Life instead of Versus, right? The Outdoor Life channel. Right. And then it changed to Versus, which then changed to NBC Sports. And I would say, "No, it's not that one. It's the one with a moose logo." And they would say, "Moose? No, I've never seen that." And I just kept asking everybody. And they just said, "No, never seen that. No, never seen that. I don't get that channel." Even my dad, he's like, "How do I see the show?" And he was going to have to get Dish Network or some sort of dish. He had too many trees around his house. He couldn't even get it. I said, "We got to do something about this." And then the next year we had a show on OLN, Outdoor Life Network, which turned to Versus. That was where the full length show was. But we also had a 2-minute show on ESPN right there, probably between your show and somebody else's. We had those little vignette shows. And
I remember.
It was fantastic. That was such a great network, both of those. I mean, the ratings on both of those networks were just astronomical. So on a weekend, we would do just huge ratings. And then that all changed. But then, same thing. ESPN decided we're not doing this anymore. Then OLN changes to Versus, and then Versus changes to NBC, and then NBC says we're not doing this anymore. And then we find ourselves on Discovery Channel with a few other things going on too. But you've had a crazy career there with all the different TV networks. Where do you see that going, do you think?
Well, we're going to run, like I said, we have a history of wearing networks out. So we're going to run Discovery. The ratings have been super there. So we're going to run Discovery and, see where it goes from there. We second-handedly, more for our sponsors than anything else is we'll put our episodes over on my YouTube channel, George Poveromo TV. So if somebody happened to miss our first and second quarter airing of Discovery, they could go over there and watch it in 4K broadcast and, pretty much just keep on trucking in that direction. And, circling back, here's an ironic story, which was the first year. I'll always remember this. And it was our first episode we aired on ESPN2. And it was a Sunday. We were airing Sunday. It was a Sunday, the Daytona 500 that was running at Sunday. I got a call on Tuesday from the programming person at ESPN. Called me up. He says, "George," he said, "we got to tell you something here." He said, "Your show on Sunday had 580-some thousand household viewers. It was the number one watch show in the entire ESPN block."
Wow.
Until Dale Earnhardt got killed. That was the day Dale Earnhardt died.
Oh, no.
And of course, after he died, he took the top ratings over there, which I remember that. I said, wow. I said, here we are running away with it. Dale Earnhardt even beat us on that one, but he took the top ratings that day because unfortunately that was when he had died in a crash.
Yeah.
But that was, I still just remember that call, that day.
That's incredible. I mean,
yeah.
They, and I often wonder, like, why do you think that women's soccer in Australia is going to outrate what we've been doing on ESPN for all these years?
I'll tell you the exact reason why. And you may know this. Is my inside sources at ESPN told me what had happened. ESPN had a very successful outdoor block. majority of the shows were all time buys. Therefore, they knew how much time they were giving out, and they knew what their income was. And they were the beast. Everybody wanted to be there. So what had happened, they started getting a little on the cocky side. They would get all these videos in from different shows, and they would like just an offbeat concept. They said, okay, we like that, but they'll go to the producer. We want to pay you to produce the show for us. We'll own the show. We'll sell the show as we deem fit, and we'll pay you X amount to produce it for us. So they started doing that, and they were acquiring all these shows with these producers. They were branching out, trying to do some of their own genre or some odd beat shows that ran somewhat, with the outdoor block. What had happened is they overextended themselves with that. And when the economy turned south, then what happened, they had their sales teams going to ICAST and coming into our industry, which is basically a mom and pop industry, trying to sell these shows. And they couldn't do it because the industry stays with some of the stronger names, that keep those names going, the most recognizable names. So what had happened, they had contracts with these people, multi-year in a lot of cases. So they had to pay these producers to pay the shows, even though ESPN was losing money. So finally, the beat counters looked at this and we're upside down here with the outdoors. We need to get out from under this thing. And that's what happened. And that's not the politically correct story that they gave. That story was they want to get back to their roots of live sports programming. Yeah. That was a facade. They had lost or losing their rear end because of that. Then over NBC Sports, they had a few shows that they were doing that to, and they jumped out of that completely and went to the time buys, kept with that because they saw what happened over there with ESPN. So that's what brought down those networks. If they just stayed, or ESPN in particular, if they just stayed with the time buy, they would probably still had a very, rich and rewarding outdoors block now.
Yeah.
And then things change too. And I think a lot of cases, who ends up taking over the programming director, they may not be a fan of fishing or the outdoors. And so they said, we don't need this stuff. It's not a good look for us. Let's take up, like you said, women's soccer or professional bowling. Not that there's anything wrong with bowling, but that's what happens.
That's kind of, you go wherever, but they pick up these kind of off sports that people don't like, Australian rules football or something like that, which is interesting. And maybe on a global market, it has a bigger ratings than what fishing can pull in. And then hunting, they used to have hunting on there too, but they wouldn't allow kill shots. They wouldn't. Right. They would get right to the kill shot, and then the next shot would be the animal on the ground, and that spawned like the Drurys. They were like, well, our people want to see kill shots, so we're just going to put this out on DVD. About the time that the DVDs came out, and created a whole industry of that because they wouldn't allow the kill shots on ESPN. It's interesting how you kind of tie all that stuff back together. But then certain networks would kind of allow the kill shots or the gaff shots. I mean, I'm sure you've had that. Yeah. That, like, we had a spearfishing show get axed off of NBC Sports. They said no, that's not not doing that. But anyway, that's back in the days where there were real gatekeepers. Like you said, even if you had the money and you were ready to do the time buy, you had to send them something, and they looked at it and they're like, I don't know, this guy, I don't think this is a good look here, or whatever, for whatever reason, any reason, no reason, they would just say no. And then you'd have to try again. But luckily it worked for both of us. You were talking about Mark Sosson there, and I just read this really great book, and a book that you'll want to read too, and had this guy on the podcast the other day. His name is Monty Burke, and he wrote this book called Lords of the Fly, and it's all about the fly fishing world record hunters when they were going to Homosassa and everything like that. But in this book, he talks about so many other things, and there's some history in there, and there was some history about Mark Sosson that I didn't have any idea about, that he had been almost solely responsible for making fly records in the IGFA. Do you remember those days when he was working on that?
Oh yeah, he was major league fly angler, fly, and then in light tackle. But he had a huge name, and reputation with the fly fishing end of it. And he pioneered just a lot of that stuff. He and Lefty Craig.
Yeah.
Those were the pioneers of fly fishing, and I don't fly fish. And I tried it a couple of times. Just it didn't move me, but that they were the pioneers with that. And he was without a doubt. I mean, you look at the guys that came before us, Mark Sosson of the world, Lefty Craig, Bob McNally, Frank Sargent. These were the ultra heavyweights.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be like looking at the old heavyweight boxers, Larry Holmes, George Foreman, Muhammad Ali. I mean, that's who these guys were. And these guys were larger than life themselves. And so naturally you aspire to be like they are. And a lot of that, maybe work ethic wise, bleeds off into like what you do or what I do.
Right.
And I was very fortunate with Mark, who was the biggest name in saltwater fishing. And again, it related to Mako owner tournaments. He was friends with Bill Monroe, and he would go on the rider trips. And when I first met him, I know who he was, but Bill Monroe brought Mark to the boat to introduce him to me. And I like laughing. I said, this guy looks like Curly from the Three Stooges. He had that haircut and everything. And he had pretty much almost the same build. And to me, he was just a jovial, friendly guy. He took an instant liking to me. And we would sit and we would talk, and we became very, very tight. And so as I mentioned, we started the seminars. But when I started my writing career in 1983, coming aboard with Saltwater Sportsman, he sat me down and he gave me an inside track that would later prove to be so valuable. And basically how that went, he said, I'm going to tell you who the good guys are in this industry, the ones you can trust. And I'm going to tell you who the are, the buttholes, I'll put it that way, in this industry that you want to watch your back and don't have any strong dealings with. And he named names. And some of those on the other side of the fence were some big name people that you would think, whoa. And so he guided me in a lot. It would be sort of like, here you are, get ready to start your first Indy 500, and you have Mario Andretti as your coach. That's how I felt, having him tell me how to write quality-wise, who to trust, and how you deliver. And he always had, which I always had, through my family, he says, you deal with honesty, you put your best work forward, and your reputation is what's going to get you through there. And he told me, he said, I see people strive and become an editor of a publication like Saltwater Sportsman, or I want to be the editor of Outdoor Life. He says, you do never, ever, ever want to accept an editor position at one of these magazines. And I looked at him and said, why? He says, because what happens, the magazines get bought out, they put their own people in, and then those editors are gone. If you remain a strong independent, your name will be your drawing card. So whatever happens, if magazines get bought out or whatever, your name will be your business card that all these people in the industry will associate you by. And that's what you want to be, a strong independent, and not get locked down to where somebody at the whim could buy a magazine and clean house and you're gone. And at the time, I didn't really understand what he was saying. But looking back, I said he was so incredibly right. That was probably one of the best bits of advice, is to just do your own thing and build your own reputation, your own name, and your own business. So he had given me a lot. And then, about 10 years of seminars, we started going our own separate ways. And then we worked out a deal. He and I were equal partners with the seminar series. And I ended up buying his half out. And like I said, I continued on, with that aspect of the business.
Interesting. And the advice that he gave you about who to stay away from and who to trust, did that remain? I mean, many years later, did you go, you know what? Somebody told me about that guy.
And 100%. And you just watch different instances in the whole bit. And absolutely, they were some just incredibly valuable pointers and tips that he had, bestowed upon me. So it was really, really remarkable, because he was the kingpin back then. There's no doubt about it. He was the big guy. He had a big saltwater show, which was a rarity to have a saltwater show back then. Yeah. I did several episodes early on with him. We did sail fishing once, and I can't even remember what year, but all of a sudden I looked at my boat. I'm fishing with him, And I'm looking, I said, well, there's Mark, but who the heck is standing near him?
Some guy with dark hair.
Really? And it was a Beatle haircut too back then.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. Did you have other mentors besides Mark that were really influential?
Absolutely. The Saltwater Sportsman team of Barry Gibson and Rip Cunningham and Spider Andresen.
Oh,
and particularly Barry Gibson, who was the editor. And he took a liking to me too. And Barry Gibson was a very staunch, hardcore New England style editor. If you could write and get a piece in Saltwater Sportsman and Barry to prove it by it, you could write for any magazine in the world, name any title. That's how strict he ran. He wrote things like the King's English. He was strict. And he and I got a good liking together and got along so well that one of my things, he would tell me, all right, George, it's November, turn in your George's Christmas list so we could approve it. And my Christmas list every November was about 8 or so places in the country and out of the country that I would travel to, go fish, and write the features for Saltwater Sportsman. It was the greatest thing in the world. The world was your map. We've been to Ecuador, Brazil, marlin fish, everywhere. And I would turn it in. He'd give me a stamp of approval. And but they were, it's a rarity in that at Saltwater Sportsman, that team that you had, Barry Gibson, Rip Cunningham, Spider Andresen, they all had large family money. And they were all fishing addicts. So it wasn't like, well, I don't fish much, but I like it, but I'm going to be an editor. No, they were fishing people first and foremost that got into magazine business. And like I said, when you looked at the original members of Saltwater Sportsman, I was the only one who really needed a job in that group when they came to work for them. And they were just really great. And they built that magazine to, what it is, today. It's so I had the honor of working under them and them, taking me under their wing. And I remember when Barry Gibson called me, their headquarters up in Boston. And it was like 1982. He said, would you be interested in coming to work with Saltwater Sportsman? And my jaw dropped. I said, where do I sign up? He said, well, we'll pay, get your air. We want to fly you to Boston. We want to have a meeting. We'll cover your air, your hotel, your meals. Let's have a meeting, see where it goes. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to, Saltwater Sportsman Kingdom. This is it. I had gone out and bought this 3-piece suit. And I mean, from the shoes, everything. And I think it was sort of like back at the time, it was, I wouldn't say it's a burnt orange suit, but it was that kind of almost like a brownish orangish stuff. Okay. I don't want to tell you what I spent on that suit, but I flew up there and I go to the meeting. I walk in there and I see them all in there and there's slacks, fishing shirts, and they looking at me up and down. So we sat down, we talked. They took me out to lunch, the whole bit. So Barry calls me next day. He said, George, congratulations, you're on board. I said, fantastic. Oh my God. He says, we like you because you're a strong saltwater angler. You're knowledgeable. You're a good guy. But Barry said, in my book, you know what sold me to hire you? I go, what? That suit. Anybody that come up to this office wearing a suit like that definitely has to be a good guy. So he hires you. So that turned out to be one of my better investments in life with that stupid suit.
That's funny. That's funny, man. That's really funny. Yeah, that's back in the day where you dressed for success. Like today, if you wore a 3-piece suit to an interview at a magazine, everybody's in there wearing shorts and t-shirts. They'd be like, "Who is this guy? Why would you missed the mark there, buddy?"
It is. I remember my earlier ICAST shows, I would go in with a suit like that until after a number of years, people started making fun of me. So I then started dressing down from that point. Yeah.
Well, I did the same thing. I always dressed up at ICAST. My dad was a salesman. He's an insurance salesman, and he always gave me good advice. He's like, you make the first impression. You show people that you're there to do business. Nobody wants to talk to anybody in shorts, and you dress like one grade higher than them. So if they're wearing a polo, you should wear like a button down. If they're wearing a sport coat, you should wear a suit. And you're dressed one step higher than, but not, if everybody's wearing shorts, you don't go in a tuxedo. And so there's like this fine line of kind of how to present yourself. But it's changing all the time. The world is becoming
absolutely.
much more casual. And but there's still that same kind of thing. I still look to my dad's advice there and say, well, one step higher. So if they're in shorts and a t-shirt, then I need to be in nice shorts and a nice polo, or something like that. And
that's the way it was. And in fact, I think I even saved that suit. It's somewhere in the back of my closet. I can tell you for sure I cannot fit into it anymore, but I think I saved that just as a token,
That's funny. It's probably heavy polyester too.
Oh, it is. You would sweat to death. You'd lose 20 pounds wearing that thing.
Yeah, that's so funny. So you've been able to fish with so many different people, write about so many different people. One of the people that I know that you have a tight connection with is Bouncer Smith, who I think the world of. And how did you guys meet? How did that happen that you guys started hanging out and becoming friends?
I had met him before I accepted the position to run the Greater Miami Billfish Tournament. And I'm trying to think exactly where. It might have been at a fishing club meeting or whatever. And then he invited me to go fishing with him. And then he and I worked together. He was on the board of the Greater Miami Billfish Tournament. And he was one of the guys that sided with the conservation aspect that we really do need to go release. So he was one of the guys I did have in my corner. And, he and I just, formed this bond. And he was, all these years, just remarkable what he had done as far as a charter captain. And I say this, and I probably get myself in hot water with a lot of the other Miami captains. But as far as charter captains go in the Miami area, he was in a league totally unto himself. Here's a guy that was amazing at catching sea trout in Miami's Biscayne Bay, tarpon. Few were better than Bouncer in the Miami area. Snook is amazing inlet, amazing reef person, amazing offshore libaiter, and daytime swordfish. He covered every single aspect of saltwater fishing, where some captains specialize in something. That's their strong suit. Bouncer specializes in every single thing that swims in Miami. And he was very intelligent early on with his career, and that he befriended a lot of the outdoor writers. And he would, back then it was Jim Hardy with the Miami Herald, and Sue Cocking came aboard, Steve Waters with the Sun Sentinel, Chris Dummett at the Palm Beach Post, and later Willie Howard, Jan Folk. So what he would do, he would have an open invitation. He would call, come on down the mackerel running. Come on, good sailfish fight. Come on, let's get some tarpon. He would always bring these newspaper writers and these magazine writers in for a full day of fishing with him, absolutely no charge, show him a great time. And he had built up such a press-friendly relationship that transcended all these major magazines where people would write about or mention him, to where he became basically a household name. And it was so smart by him just fishing with press people and hooking up and doing some television shows. He was very press savvy, and he created the Bouncer Smith aura that he enjoys right now. And on top of it, he was an excellent angler too, but he was very people friendly. And so he had the smart business plan. Didn't cost him anything but a day of fishing out on the boat. But what he got in return with stories or television episodes paid 100-fold on what his initial time and fuel investment was. So really just an incredible, bank of knowledge.
Yeah, he's got a good heart too.
No doubt about it.
He's just a nice, I don't know, it's a sweetheart of a guy. That's what I hear people say that about him all the time. Like, oh, Bouncer, he's a sweetheart of a guy. Like, he just has a good heart. He's just a nice guy from all my dealings with him. And I haven't had a tremendous amount of dealings with him, but I did get a chance to go to him and get his whole story. Like, he started from being a kid and like all you're talking about, like the trout fishing and the snook fishing. And, he used to ride his bicycle down to the seawalls and do all that stuff. And he would walk along and kind of troll back and forth by walking along the seawalls and find all this stuff. But he's fascinating. I really, really thought highly of him, or still do. I just saw that he retired, I guess, from...
He did. What an incredible legacy, 50 some odd years in a charter business. And to give you an idea how just strong of a guy he really is, you got to remember in his heyday until about a year ago, he'd run 3 trips a day.
I know.
He would run the night tarpon trips on top of it all, get ready the next morning to either do a half day or a full day and do tarpon. He was just almost a 24/7 machine. And anybody that wanted to run at his level, he would burn them right out.
Right.
And I was surprised that A.B. Raymond, who was his captain mate in those later years here, I always said that anybody who could be a mate and work with bouncer, who could hang in there, is going to learn so much as far as spots and techniques. And bouncer's hard. I mean, he runs the boat. It's bouncer's way, and he'll let you know it too. So, he did chew out a few mates, that couldn't hang with him, but AB did. And AB had since gone out on his own as a charter captain. But the amount of knowledge that he acquired through those years of working with bouncer really has to be immense.
Yeah.
And, but bouncer definitely has his own ways of doing things. And, that we have some funny bouncer stories there too, based on that. And I could do some things to him because we're friends that I could tease him, and he lets me get away with it. Whereas other people he probably wouldn't let get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet there's some great stories there. So the daytime sword fishing, were you kind of on the forefront of that?
No, not in the daytime stuff. I did a good amount of the nighttime stuff, which was, basically how they were doing it originally here. And then they started doing a daytime deal. So I come up on that one a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. And then having done that, you don't go night fish anymore for them because it's so much more, in my opinion, rewarding to be able to see this fish leaping and jumping into the air, going back down, but having a look at it when it's 50, 60, somewhat feet deep, and see those iridescent purples, those blues of this fish actually lit up. It's different at night, but what you really miss seeing, at night versus the daytime, it's incredible. What a world of difference.
What a world of difference in just the whole production of the whole thing. Like the first time I ever went nighttime sword fishing was with Kenny Harris in Key West, and he takes me, and it's during tarpon season, and I'm dog tired because I'm fishing every single day. And then he's like, you got to go nighttime sword fishing with me. So, you're getting up at 4 a.m. anyway. So I'm like, okay, I'll go. Meet me at 10. I'm like, God, okay, 10. And I didn't recover from this trip for 3 weeks, and we didn't catch anything. But he was using those giant lights, and he had the whole thing all rigged up. But I mean, I went that one time at literally the worst time. I think I had babies at home that weren't sleeping well, and I'm tarpon fishing. But I'm like, Kenny Harris just asked me to go sword fishing, so I guess I should go. And my wife's like, you hadn't slept in weeks, but I felt terrible after that trip. But the daytime thing, I'm way more of a fan of the daytime now.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. What an animal. And I think pound for pound, without a doubt, that's the strongest fighting fish out there. And I've caught an amazing amount of fish and big ones, throughout my career. And until that, my boat was with the big eye tuna. And I caught my largest big eye that I caught. It was during the show up in Maryland. Was a 215-pound big eye that I fought in a 50 stand-up. And compared to a yellowfin, and especially compared to a bluefin, those big eyes don't give up. They fight till you bring that fish to gaff. And those have been some of the hardest fights that I've had. Swordfish would outdo that pound for pound, because the swordfish is just an amazing animal that could charge all the way deep, come back up. It's not bothered by anything. And it's an intelligent fish in that, compared to a sailfish or a blue marlin that's out there jumping, the swordfish realizes it's in trouble, and a lot of times wants to seek out what's causing this trouble, and could become violent by running out of boat. It's an intelligent fish.
I know. And I noticed something when I was doing a little research on you, that you had a cameraman attacked by a swordfish, and we did too. Yes. I mean, it was really, really close. We had the camera mounted on a scooter that pulls the diver along, right? So it's got a big hard plastic cone on it, and the bill of that thing pierced that hard plastic cone, went in about 8 inches, and then broke off. But we have the video of it, and this fish is swimming along, and it sees the diver and turns, and absolutely was not like any sort of a accidental thing. This was an absolute attack, and it was scary. I mean, if it hadn't hit that scooter, it would have gone right through his chest. So the same kind of thing happened to your diver.
The same
right?
exact thing. And fortunately, what saved our guy, Kevin Tierney, was that he's highly experienced underwater with the billfish. And the fish tried to get him 3 times. And we had brought this fish up alongside the boat on the leader, and they filmed at about 170-pound fish. And he said, I'm going in the water. I want to get some underwater. So, all right, Kevin, be careful. It's a swordfish. So fish runs off, bunch of line. He finally gets in the water, and he's down there filming it. And the fish makes a big circle. I'm cranking it back up to the leader. It noticed him out there, and it started charging. And I'm screaming, Kevin, I couldn't stop the fish. It runs right up, probably 10 feet in front of him, hangs a 90-degree angle to the right, dives deep. And I'm screaming at Kevin, get out of the water. He's trying to attack me. So Kevin's backpedaling to get to the camera boat. I fight the sword back up alongside the boat. It looks at him again out there, and it charges. And at this point, I can't stop the fish. I put all the drag pressure I could. And it was screaming, Kevin, Kevin, Kevin. And next thing I see is Kevin bounce up about a half a foot and splash back in the water. Oh, my God, he got hit. Are you all right? And he says, yeah, he don't like me. And I said, get out of the water. And by the time the fish did the same thing, got him alongside the boat again and charged him a 3rd time. This time, the camera boat operator saw what was going on, grabbed Kevin by his shoulders, lifting him up onto the gunwales. The swordfish goes under the camera boat at him again. We finally bring the fish back up, get him on the leader, and then clip it free. But what Kevin said happened to him, and he has the video and the still shot to prove it. The fish was coming at him, and he was taught that when you're in the water suspended and a billfish comes at you, do a back float, because it presents a smaller target. If you're straight up and down, that fish could hit you anywhere. You're not slowing or changing its momentum. But if you do a back float, the fish would have to stop, go up 90 degrees to try to hit you. Now, how he had the nerve to do that is beyond me. He watched the fish come in, and the fish actually, with his video, what he's doing the backflip, the dorsal fin goes between his crotch. And when Kevin was lifted in the air, that was the back of the swordfish going under him that lifted him up and dropped him back on the water. And he has videos of this, which was, amazing. I think the only guy in the world that has a video of a swordfish going through his crotch. And since then, Kevin, he talks like Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees, that high-pitched voice.
Yeah. That's man, we don't do that anymore. Anything else with the swordfish, nobody goes in the water. It's GoPro on a stick, that's it. I mean, that thing, it really kind of scared me. And we were in Louisiana, so we were far away from our normal hospitals, far away from the families, far away from everything. And I just started thinking, man, if that fish had hit him, that could have been really, really bad. And then when I look at the video, it is an absolute full-on attack. It's not like you're talking about. I mean, your fish went after him 3 times. So then there's another story about you getting pulled in by a swordfish.
Yes. Yeah.
How did that happen?
I call that my going over the wall in the Daytona 500 incident. And that was part of this whole crazy weekend. Okay, that happened to me first. And what had happened? We were fishing with Nick Stanzik doing the show. We run up to a spot. We drop down and we hook up with a sword immediately and fight this. And we get this fish near the boat. Probably fought him for about an hour. Beautiful fish. I'm looking at their 250, 300. So what a remarkable fish for the show. And the hook pulls. We go back on that spot. No sooner did they hit bottom, get me hook up again. Fight another fish for an hour, maybe a little bit over. Get the fish a little bit farther up, but we could see it. Another beautiful fish. We pull the hook. We said, man, we're just snake bitten. It's just bad. We go and we do it a 3rd time. We hook up. Now I'm fighting this fish for 2 hours. Okay, now keep in mind, this is like almost constant fighting. And we're finally getting the fish somewhat close to where we think we're going to beat it. And I'm standing by my outboards, facing out. And my buddy, Carl, was running his boat as the camera, as our camera crew on. I see Carl coming around the outboards with the fish angle in that direction. I go, Carl, what are you doing? He said, the camera crew, they don't want to see your butts. They said, we got to get in front of you. I said, Carl, we've had bad luck. We pulled the hooks on 2 swords. That angle, you're going to cut the fish off. I said, back up, go around the bow of my boat, come in that way. The sun will be at your back, and the fish is nowhere near there. You can get all the footage you need. I said, we're already having bad luck. So he backs out, and he goes idling around. And the last thing that I remember seeing at a corner of my eye was his boat coming around the bow of my boat. as he was going to try to get position. I go to crank down. I feel his wake, and it wasn't a bad wake, lapped the side of my boat. But it just so happened as I was going down to take a crank, the wake lapped on my boat, bounced it, my feet went up, and next thing you know, I catapulted in the water with this swordfish, and I'm going down. And I remember, since I always had an escape route. I'm a small boat guy, I big game fish, and I knew that sooner or later, with your stand-up gear, there's going to be a chance you're going to go overboard. So how do you survive it? And I had these three things in my mind play out. The first thing is when you hit the water, slowly back to drag off on the reel to alleviate the pressure. Because some people will freak and not do anything. That sword will pull you down, or they freak and they go into free spool and create a big bird's nest, which locks it up and you still go down. That was number one. I did that. And when I did that, the pressure came off and it came back to the top. The second part of the escape route was to grab the rod, pull to my chest, and unclip and swim out of the harness. That's where something went wrong. I'm doing it. I can't feel the rod, but I know I'm stuck to it. I know I free spooled it a good bit. And I said, I got to figure out what's going on. So I grabbed the side of my boat, and Nick Stanczyk's grabbing me by my shirt, and I'm slapping his hand off me, because if I go down, Nick Stanczyk is 80 pounds soaking wet. If I go down, I'm going to take him with me, and I'm not going to drown the kid. So I was thinking to myself, I got one shot here. I have to take a breath, find out what's going on with this rod, and I got to get out of it. Fortunately, Kevin saw what was happening. He jumps off the camera boat, swims over to me. When I had flipped over, the rod somehow twisted around with the rod itself going between my legs, and I'm out there trying to grab it. I can't get to it. Kevin gets in there, gets a hand, unclips me. We put the rod back into the boat, and I get back in the boat to fight the fish. But the third part of the escape plan wouldn't have worked, was to grab your pliers and cut the line, but the pliers were underneath the big stand-up harness that I had. And I'll circle back here in a second, but I got back up in the boat. And I said, Nick, push that drag down. Is this fish still here? And the fish was still there. So I get back up, get in the harness again, beat beyond comparison and fatigue, fought the fish another half hour, and we're getting alongside the boat. Nick says, you want me to fly gap it or you want me to dart it? I said, kill this thing the fastest way you know how, because I don't know how much I've got left in me. And he did. And we brought in, it was a 256-pound swordfish that we were so far out, and we just boated the fish. It had gone dark. And we had that like a 40-some mile run in the dark, the Bud and Mary's. I remember pulling in. It was 10 o'clock. We're weighing the fish. Richard Stanczyk comes in. It was like a surreal moment to it all. But what got me in trouble was when we were sword fishing, and Nick said, you want to put your safety harness on from your reel down to your boat. I said, no, that in case you got overboard like I did, somebody can pull you in. So now we don't need that. He said, I'm saying, so we're pros, we're fine. We don't really need that. And in my mind, and I put this in the show, was that, accidents always happen to the other guy. So we don't need it. But that day I was the accident. So number one, you always put that safety cord on that rod and reel in case it ever happens again. You keep those cutters on the outside of any harness that you have to get through them fast. So we certainly, learned a valuable lesson on that one. But it was definitely an experience, and I don't care how experienced you are out there. When I hit the water for the first time, it was the freakiest feeling ever. You see bubbles, and the first thing that went through my mind, so this is how I'm going to die. Because you remember back to those Marlin stories, mates getting the wire wrapped around their hands, and I said, no, I'm not. I said, think back to those 3 escape mechanisms, and then I did what I did, and so we got lucky, and our other camera guy filmed it all. And I said, that's great. I'm sitting there getting ready to drown and you're filming. He said, well, I figured your wife would like that for the life insurance to prove you actually died. Well, so it was an amazing experience.
Man, that's really crazy. But it seems like the people that have the most experience, when they get themselves in trouble, it's something that's very, very, very kind of a regular occurrence. Like, it's not just some crazy extreme thing. Like, I've heard of people that, surfers that have surfed all these giant waves and they get themselves in trouble. They hit their head on some little wave that they're trying to teach their kid how to surf, or, like like your deal, like it probably wasn't the roughest day you've ever been out there, probably
No.
wasn't the most dangerous day, and something like that happens. It happens when you least expect it, and it happens, it's kind of trivial. Like it was a small boat wake, and it just happened at exactly the right second to make you, lose your footing, and then all of a sudden you've got tremendous pressure from the sailfish, so you're going in. But I don't know. That's what we all have to watch out for. Is it's not like you're gonna, get struck by lightning or something. It's probably something very, very trivial on a place that you've been hundreds of times before. Like those are the things that the experienced boater and the experienced fisherman has to watch out for. The things that it wouldn't happen here. I've done this thousands of times. Yeah.
and I was angry at myself, and people said, "Man, you almost checked out and left the building, whatever." So no, I didn't. I was so angry with myself for letting that happen. And I said I was nowhere any danger, and I was angry with myself for well over a year for letting that happen. And people would tell me, my camera crew, finally after about a year, it started to settle in. I'd look back at the video, and then I would talk to Kevin and said, "Man, I think maybe I was a little closer to trouble than I actually thought I was." I said, "I've been angry at myself for letting it happen." And he says, "No." He said, "You realize," I said, "you were able to back the drag off, but the way that rod got twisted around, what if that braid wrapped around the rod tip or it wrapped around your foot? You were going down." And I started thinking about that. He says, "Yeah, that's pretty." You think about that, when all that happened, that the braid didn't go around the rod tip or around my shoe or my foot. And you realize what could have happened to you that day. And when I had first gone overboard, I was going down because of pressure of fish going down. So it was, now I look back and say, yeah, maybe a little bit closer to leaving the building than I actually thought.
Yeah. Did that change anything for you after anything?
I went back to, being smart about this. And when we hook up to, a swordfish, and it was in the last swordfish show we did, you've got the big stand-up harness. I've got a big cable type restraint that goes on the back of that harness to a part of the boat that's not going to come apart if you go overboard. So if that ever happens, somebody could grab that if you're in any kind of trouble and pull you in. So you went back to the normal safety deals that you had foregone when I first did that for the lack of it looking cool. And then, you just put common sense back in the game, which you knew, but you put on the sideline. And it seems like when you put that common sense on the sideline, that's when you get bitten,
Yeah. Well, listen, man, I'm glad you made it out of that one, and probably lots of other ones. You're a legend in the television business, and I really appreciate you spending a lot of time with us today and telling us some stories, certainly that I've never heard before. And I think that a lot of your fans probably haven't heard a lot of these stories, so it'll be very entertaining for them, as it was for me. But thanks, George. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. I mean, I could sit here all day and just do this with you.
Well, we'll do it. We'll do it again. We'll do it again. You're obviously you're obviously really good at it. Got a lot of stories, and certainly we will do it again. But if people want to watch your show, go to your seminars, follow you on social media, how would people connect with you?
They could go to my website, which is georgepoveromo.com. And we have our television schedule up there, a lot of how-to features and articles. They could follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at George Poveromo. And then, of course, Facebook. I'm there as well. But the website will definitely take them a lot of different places. And they could also watch, if they missed our season so far, go to YouTube at George Poveromo TV and catch our episodes anytime they want 4K broadcast quality. So that's where they could find me, and you certainly know where you can find me. And I can't thank you enough for inviting me. I mean, you're a big legend out there too, and it's amazing what you accomplished and how you've upheld the sport with a gentleman-like approach, which I definitely respect, because you do it the good old-fashioned way. You're out there, you're fishing, you're teaching fishing. You don't have any special stunts that you need to sort of bolster up your show. You're a hardcore angler. You do it the right way. So. Yeah, utmost respect for you too, and I appreciate you having me on board.
Well, I appreciate it, and I feel very similar to you in that, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Lots of people, came before us and paved the road for the television world that we find ourselves in, and even the seminar world. Everything. I mean, there were true giants that came before, and really did most of the hard work. But luckily, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. And you guys, if you want to follow George, he has taught hundreds of thousands of people how to saltwater fish better. And through his seminars and television shows, I think hundreds of thousands is probably a far understatement, right? Because he just told us he got 500,000 people watch one of his shows. So millions of people to fish better. But anyway, George, great. It was fun. It was really fun to get these stories from you, and I very much enjoyed it. Stay tuned, guys. We got a big week coming up, and we'll have more great guests just like George Poveromo. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.